Welcome to Inner Voice of Knowing podcast. I'm Kaye, a shamanic leadership coach and healer, guiding you through life with a foot in both worlds. When you understand the terrain of the inner landscapes, the mental, emotional, spiritual, and energetic, you will become the leader within your physical life, both personally and professionally. After all, the power of change is in your hands. Let's get this journey started. Welcome back to Inner Voice of Knowing. There is such a massive clearing from within ourselves being called for. It's just being amplified. Anything that is sitting within us that is not conducive to our growth, or it is only if we bring awareness to it and if we bring change to it. So there's a lot being triggered within memories, within emotions. And if it's still sitting within our system, in the background, driving our responses or our reactiveness, and therefore our choices, it's being called to clear so that we can move further beyond the illusions that have become intrusions and continue to grow into our knowing power and potential, and to become and to create the lives and businesses that we feel calling to us from deep within our aspirations. There is no person that is better than you or lesser than you. Remember, we are souls and energy having this physical experience, and we have all been challenged along the way. We have all felt hurt along the way. But I learnt in my shamanic journey quite early on in my 20s that I had the power and the ability to reframe stories, to reframe the story that would then alter the emotional charge that it had with it. Now, there's lots of different ways that we can do this, but the first thing is, because I was talking to a client the other day about reframing, and she said, but that won't change anything. And here's what I want to say to you. That will change everything. The false stories and beliefs that are attached to the emotional reactiveness and response, and then the actions and the words that you take, are like a loop, a glitch in the system, if you will, that just keeps you on repeat. And the more that you repeat it, the more that you instill and grow root systems into it of the reality of it. But here's the thing. Your mind doesn't know what's real and what's not real. So when you sit and you reframe, and there are many different ways to reframe for different circumstances, and we can certainly get into covering off on some of those. But to reframe something is to make it anew. It's like rewriting. It's changing our perception and giving us a greater perspective. It's becoming the author of our story. It's changing our mindset, that changes our words, that changes our emotions, that changes our energy. You are the programmer of your computer. You can change the film, the storyline, and that will change how you think about it, how you feel about it. Just like the more you speak positive words, the more you feel positive. The more you speak words below the line, the more you contract and align with it. And here's what I learned very early on in my healing journey, for a lack of a better word. We'll use my upbringing as an example. The more that I started to examine my upbringing in relationship to my mother, we'll just use that one because it was then also with my father, but more so with my mother. The more I examined that and the more it triggered emotion within me, unaddressed emotion, the more I felt a victim to it, the more I focused on it, the brain will automatically continue to find validation in that. So what happens is it becomes like a whirlpool, and it just spins around and around and around, becomes repetitive, gains more traction, and eventually, not deliberately, that's all we see. So the story becomes heavier and becomes darker. And then what happened for me is it elaborated on stories that took it beyond truth. It amplified because I stayed there so long. True healing is about the changing and the transformation of that energy to get it to flow again. True healing is about the reframing, not staying a victim, lifting that energy up through our system until it becomes rewired into something more, until we are released from the pain and the persistence. We're not doing make-believe. We're moving beyond the limited perceptions, gaining a greater perspective. We're freeing ourselves. We all deserve freedom from that which we feel suppressed by, and we also need to remember that the story is only according to your personal truth from your perception, from the makeup of who and how you are. And remember, we also need to bring love, compassion, understanding, and forgiveness, not just to ourselves, but to others, to start seeing the other participants in our life as human beings suffering the same human condition, faced with challenges to grow. They have a history too that gets carried around inside of them. And it takes great courage to go within, to reframe, to reclaim, to release, to create that change. And sometimes you're going to need help with it. Otherwise, you'll keep going in at the surface, recycling, recycling, recycling like that incredible whirlpool. Nothing changes. You just feel hurt. The story becomes bigger, deeper, vaster. So let's talk about the power of that reframing, because we all understand the power of the mind. And what you focus on is where your energy goes to. Now, you don't need to go searching back into your past, because all those emotions, all those thoughts are with you here and now in the present. So we've looked at processes to use breath to release. There are all these different shamanic practices. And notice it's the word practices that we can implement. It's like the fruit basket that offers more variety. We need the variety of tools to draw from. and one can lead to the other. So something was triggered for me a couple of weeks ago, and I felt grief. So what happens with grief? The shoulders come forward, the body drops over as we're energetically going down. And suddenly that voice of knowing came to me and said, time to reframe, Kaye. Do not go into being a victim of this. Do not go into a repetitive cycle. Okay? Because that's that whirlpool. This is a new opportunity to change. It has come up to serve me. So here's the first moment. Here's the first choice of the shamanic process of reframing. What if you start to say, this is not happening to me, this is happening for me? Now, I have some statements that I harness during that, and I've used them in some pretty big stormy times, what have felt like stormy or fearful times. And they are powerful anchors. Okay, because you want that anchor, so then you can then take that time for the next layers, because reframing is multiple layers. But the first thing is to go, I need to anchor. I'm choosing to reframe, so I need to anchor. Questions are powerful. Negative questions invoke a negative response. Positive questions, power questions invoke a powerful response. So what if this is happening for me? Then I have statements like, putting up the central pole, or in my day, it used to be the central pole to a tent, and then sort of pulling out the walls and anchoring those down. So that power question is that central force. Then to continue to harness that and branch that out a little bit, and you can replace the word God with source, spirit, universe, whatever you like, or life. Only goodness comes from God. Only goodness comes from source, even if I cannot see it at the time. Now, that's when something's happening now. If it's of the past, you can do the same thing. How did it serve me? I didn't know it back then, but it was serving me. There's a gift in this. Also, the next one is, I can't see around corners. Only source knows the whole picture. That's setting that reframing process of, I don't know it all. I'm limited by my perceptions. I'm limited by how I viewed and experienced something. So I don't know it all. That power, the universe, source, God, whatever you like, sees more than I do, knows more than I do. So I'm reframing it. I'm taking it into a space that is bigger than just the I. That life is here for me, not against me. All of this is what I term reframing. Just be open to the possibilities of reframing. And I know from experience, and I know from working with so many others for 34 years, nearly made myself 10 years older. For 34 years, this is powerful. And I have recently been drawing on it again. A memory. So I personally did that. You know what? This is serving me. How is this serving me? Why has this come up again? Why does it repeat again and again and again? And in particular, with this other person. And then realizing, one, it's someone else's perception, and I cannot change that. For all I need to do is know who I am and how I am and take responsibility for what I've done and what I do and how I do it. Okay? No defense involved with that. And the defensiveness comes down because there's no fear. And there's no fear when you're in gratitude for the experience, because fear cannot exist in that experience. Or if required, utilizing that 5-minute defuse your fears process, which is actually on the homepage of my website. If you want to download it, it's for free and it's powerful. I still personally use it and always will if I can't move through a fear. But it's also going into that state of gratitude, which is in the now moment. It's not the past. It's not a projection to the future, which is where the fears feed from. And the sense of gratitude is tied in with those simple, anchoring, reframing statements of this is happening for me. I don't know what it is yet, but I know that only goodness comes from the universe. I can't see around corners. Only Source knows the whole picture. So I choose to stand in the knowing and the faith of that. Or for many, it starts off with the faith. It's now become a knowing. The more you have the experience of these processes, it's a knowing. You know the power and the potential of all these levels of reframing. But to begin with, you might be trying something new, putting something new into practice, or calling upon something that you've already known because you've put it down and it's time to pick it up again. So reframing is at that thought level. Reframing is also at the physical responsive level. So, for example, when the crying starts, when the feeling like this is unjust, observe your body. You'll slump, you'll hunch over forward possibly. Your body language will go into a disempowering position, which weighs you down. So another part of the reframing is align with those anchors, which will start to shift your physical body. Take a deep breath and go into an open, reframe your physical positioning. All right? If you're feeling defensive and actually disempowered but trying to establish your power, you might also be having your hands on your hips. It's like almost ready for a fight, bring it on. You want to be in a relaxed but upright, open position. Not defensive, in body stance, not broken, not collapsing. So you've reframed the way you're going to view this. You've reframed your physical response. This creates an energetic, clearer channel for this energy to flow through you and with you and for you. Okay? Then there might be the memory. It could be a recent memory, but most reactiveness is coming from something that stems deeper. So I've been back into a memory many times and ran it from the perspective like a film of how I received that experience. And then I rerun that scene and I reframe my response because I can't change another, but I can change my response to it where it doesn't affect me, where I'm more empowered in my response, where it might bounce off me. And the more that you reframe that scene with your eyes closed and reliving it, but changing the script, your mind knows no different. You are rewiring yourself. I have taken myself, I have guided many, many people, men and women, through this very shamanic, energetic reframing process. From that first choice of I will not be a victim. This is happening for me. What's the gift in this? What's the opportunity within this? I can't see around corners. Only goodness comes from the universe. Changing the body language. And then going back into that landscape. And sometimes the reframing is seeing the other person in that experience from a different perspective. I did it once. I was visiting my mother with my youngest child. I don't know, he might have only been 1 or 2 at the time. And he was sitting on the floor in my mother's house playing. My younger sister was there, and I can't even remember what she was doing, packing things, organising something. My mother was getting agitated, but she would turn around and be snappy with me. And I can be very direct at times, especially back in my youth. And it's like, don't take this out on me. Long story short, I ended up with the black eye from my mother. Now, this is not to bag on my mother. This is to use as an example. I love my mother dearly, love her dearly. She has provided every experience for me that I have ever needed to free myself, to understand myself, to have the opportunities to reframe, to also see her struggles. And as I grabbed my son and was walking up the driveway, which was quite steep, my mother came to me. And how I perceived it at the time was always trying to make me feel guilty. And that was a moment where I'm like, no more will I ever let anybody do this to me. And I decided that I needed time apart because I loved my mother so much that I would not sit before her until I had come to forgiveness, because I loved her so much. I did not want to sit there with resentment. So I took the time. But part of that process, part of that healing process for me, part of that coming to love, well, I was already with love for my mother, always have had that compassion, understanding, and forgiveness, was this reframing process. And I relived that moment, and then I decided to reframe that moment, walking away from her and my perception of her trying to make me feel guilty. What I did is I saw a woman who loved me desperately, who was in fear and shock of what had happened. was in fear and shock of what might happen or what was happening, not knowing what my intention was with her. Fear and shock of what she had done that she had probably perceived that she would never, ever do. Fear and shock, fear and shock, fear and shock and desperateness. And in that reframing, that's what I saw in her face, in her actions, in her words. And I felt differently. All the tension of all that memory left my body. All that held on, how could she, what a terrible thing to do. And I also, in that reframed story, thanked her for the experience because it gave me an opportunity to change that pattern, to set a boundary. When I looked at her and pointed and said, no one, regardless of who they are, even you, will make me feel guilty again. But in the reframed story, which was very powerful in that moment, but in that reframed story, I thanked her for the experience and the opportunity for me to change a pattern inside of myself, which was I would feel guilty. No one can make me. No one can bully me unless I take it on. No one can make me feel guilty unless I take it on. I just changed the whole story. And I can talk about that story now. I can remember that experience. And I don't have any reactiveness emotionally. But more importantly, physically, there's no tension that sparks up because it's no longer held in the nervous system, and it's in the nervous system that the history remains until we've really pulled out the root system and reframing. Shamanically reframing helps us do this. We completely change the narrative. We flip the experience into something that has served us, into a new perspective, into a new outcome. It connected me more deeply with my mother. And I can see now that when I reconnected with my mother, she knew we didn't have to talk about it. I'd forgiven. She felt the compassion. And that was a moment where I didn't see it at the time, but we were developing more beyond mother-daughter into also friends and two women. My mother was understood, not for what was expected of her, but for how human she was and what she too goes through and how challenged she is and what she carries around. It was also in that moment that I asked more and more about my mother's story, about my mother's history. And I could do that because I was no longer carrying around a victimized self, a victimized child within me. I was released because I had reframed the whole experience. Because you're reliving it when you go back to it visually. And as you then reframe it with the intention to reframe, you can feel it all leave, all that tension leave and drain away, drop away. Now you deserve freedom. You deserve that release. In that reframing, I also recognized there's many ways to experience something. When we start to look at it from that perspective, there are many ways. Let's look at it this way. If you're standing in your backyard, you can only see what's in your backyard bound by that fence. You can't see beyond it. You might see treetops. You might have that view. But if you then stand on a stool, what you see and perceive is vaster than your initial view. You see beyond the confines of that fence. And if you climb up on a ladder, your view is increased. Even then, how you turn around and look at your backyard looks different. You have a completely new view, a new perspective. But at that top of that ladder, that view is so vast and so opened up than when you're standing on the ground within the confines of that fence. That's another way to look at it. Don't get stuck so firm in your memory that you feed it, that you swirl in it, because that doesn't serve you. Reframing how you choose to think about it. I choose not to be the victim. I choose to say this serves me, but I don't understand it yet. I don't see the full picture. But I know only goodness comes. Everything here is here designed for me, not against me. The minute you do that and don't need the understanding and you let go of holding firm to being right and being wounded or feeling wounded, and you choose that part of yourself that is whole and healed and filled with power and potential and expansiveness. Because remember, the universe exists you, therefore you exist within the universe. What are you capable of? Amazing things. Your mind is powerful, but it's got glitches in the system, and it's time to upgrade and update and power up. And then talking about those experiences, you will not only feel mentally freed, emotionally freed, physically freed. Your words will reflect that freedom, that compassion, that understanding. That love. That love that then develops. That's a powerful, powerful gift that you give to yourself that is ultimately then gifted to others. And there are moments where I will have some memory re-triggered that I have completely almost forgotten about because it has no charge for me now. And then if it has a charge, there's just a few more thorns to pull out, and I'll go back in and reframe and reframe and reframe in all those varying ways. I'd love to hear your feedback as you give this a go. But remember, the first couple of things to take notice of are your experience has been limited. It was very real for you at the time. But the more you stay in that, the more you feed it, the heavier it becomes, the darker that it becomes. And healing does not have to be a long and lengthy process. And it gets faster the more that we experience changing and reframing and realigning and understanding that we're really working with energy of the mind, energy of the emotions, energy of the body, energy. And we can direct and redirect the energy. We can climb up to the top of that ladder and change our perspective. Create a new narrative. And gain freedom. Living in the moment. From love, compassion, understanding, forgiveness, power, and potential. Give this a go. And if you need support, I'm available wherever you live. Healing energy knows no bounds. You can work with me. You can come and do my coaching programs, because everything that I do is about energy, integration, and change by being a bridge for you to tap into your power and potential. I'll catch you next time. Join me on my next episode. And if you love this podcast, please subscribe by clicking on the plus button if you're on Apple, or like and follow on Spotify, rate and review. And please share Inner Voice of Knowing with your friends.